I sit at my kitchen table at 11:30 p.m., having just clicked confirm payment on the final $2,300 catering bill for my sister Sarah's wedding. My phone buzzes with a group text from my mother, Helen, sister Sarah, and brother Mark. "You're not invited tomorrow. Sarah doesn't want you there after everything you've done. Don't come." I stare at the screen in disbelief, my hands trembling as I process that my family has just excluded me from the wedding I spent 8 months planning and $15,000 funding. The coffee in my mug has gone cold as I scroll back through 8 months of messages, trying to understand how we arrived at this moment. It started in March when Sarah burst into my Portland apartment, practically glowing as she showed off her engagement ring from David, a middle school teacher she'd met at a coffee shop in Oregon City. Within minutes, she was panicking about wedding costs. I remember exactly what I said. "Don't worry about money. I'll handle everything." As a freelance graphic designer who'd built a solid client base, I had savings and the skills to make her dream wedding happen. Sarah worked part-time at a boutique downtown, barely making enough to cover her rent, while David was drowning in student loans from his teaching degree. That same week, I created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every expense. Venue deposit at Riverside Gardens, $3,000. Photographer Jessica Chen, $2,500. Flowers from Maria's Garden, $1,800. I added line items for catering decorations, invitations I'd designed myself, music, lighting, everything. The months blurred together as I worked 60-hour weeks to fund Sarah's perfect day. I took on corporate rebranding projects that paid well but drained my creativity. I skipped my planned vacation to Hawaii, redirecting that money toward wedding expenses. Every weekend meant visiting vendors, tasting cakes, examining linens, coordinating timelines. I designed custom invitations featuring watercolor wildflowers, Sarah's favorite. I spent hours researching the perfect shade of sage green for bridesmaid dresses. I created detailed floor plans for the reception, timing charts for the ceremony, and backup plans for weather contingencies. Sarah would hug me after vendor meetings, her eyes bright with excitement. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Linda. You're making my dreams come true." Those words kept me motivated through the exhaustion and financial strain. Our family group chat became a constant stream of wedding updates. Helen, our mother, posted frequently on Facebook about my generous daughter, Linda, making Sarah's dream wedding possible. Mark texted privately, thanking me for stepping up when the rest of us couldn't contribute much. Even our extended family praised my dedication at Sunday dinners. I felt proud watching Sarah's confidence grow as the wedding took shape. She'd been insecure about David's family wealth, worried they'd judge her background. His parents owned a successful law firm in Lake Oswego, while our family had always struggled financially. Sarah worked retail. Helen cleaned houses, and Mark bounced between construction jobs. But with my help, Sarah could have a wedding that matched David's family's expectations. 3 weeks ago, I made the final major purchase, a custom wedding dress from a boutique in Portland's Pearl District. Sarah cried when she saw herself in the mirror, the ivory silk flowing perfectly around her petite frame. Even the seamstress commented on the dress's quality and design. Last week, I finalized details with 23 vendors. The caterer confirmed the menu, featuring herb-crusted salmon and vegetarian lasagna. The florist scheduled delivery of centerpieces combining white roses, eucalyptus, and baby's breath. The string quartet received their playlist of ceremony music. Everything was coordinated, paid for, and ready. Yesterday afternoon, I received a text from my cousin Jennifer. "Sorry, accidentally added you to the wrong group chat. Check your messages." I found a group chat I'd never seen before titled Family Discussion. The participants were Sarah, Helen, Mark, and several cousins. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through months of messages. Sarah dated 4 months ago. Linda acts like it's her wedding. She keeps suggesting changes to my decisions. Helen, 3 months ago. She's so controlling. Yesterday, she corrected the florist in front of everyone. Embarrassing. Mark, 6 weeks ago. Classic Linda buying her way into being important. She always has to be the hero. Sarah, last month, David's family probably thinks she's desperate for attention. So awkward. Helen, 2 weeks ago. We need to manage this situation before the wedding. People will think Linda planned everything. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. For months, while I sacrificed my time, money, and energy, my family had been ridiculing my efforts behind my back. They accepted my generosity publicly while mocking my dedication privately. I scrolled further and found messages that made my hands shake with rage. Sarah, 10 days ago. What if we just don't mention Linda's role much during the reception? Let people assume the whole family contributed equally. Mark, 9 days ago. Good idea. David's parents already complimented Mom on the family's financial planning. Helen, 8 days ago. Linda will understand. She knows how important family image is. They had been planning to steal credit for my work to minimize my role while benefiting from my sacrifices. The wedding I'd given everything to create was being rebranded as a family effort, erasing my central contribution. The final message in the chat was from this morning. Tonight we tell Linda she's not invited. Sarah doesn't want the drama of Linda expecting recognition during her special day. I sit in my kitchen now understanding that my exclusion wasn't spontaneous anger or a misunderstanding. This was a calculated plan to cut me out after extracting everything they needed from me. My family had systematically used me, then discarded me once my usefulness expired. The spreadsheet still glows on my laptop screen, showing every payment I'd made. $15,432. 8 months of planning. Dozens of vendor meetings. Hundreds of hours designing invitations programs, place cards and decorations. Tomorrow, Sarah will walk down an aisle I arranged, wearing a dress I bought surrounded by flowers, I selected, celebrating with food, I ordered dancing to music I coordinated. And I won't be there to see any of it. My phone rings at 12:15 a.m. Sarah's name appears on the screen and I consider letting it go to voicemail. But I need answers, need to understand how my family could be this cruel. Sarah's voice is cold, defensive from the first word. Linda, I know you're upset, but you need to understand something. You've been overwhelming everyone for months. David's family thinks you're trying to take over our wedding. I grip the phone tighter, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. Take over the wedding I planned and paid for completely. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Sarah snaps. You act like you own everything because you spent money. Nobody asked you to take control of every single detail. I list my sacrifices methodically. I worked extra projects for months to afford your venue. I designed your invitations programs and decorations for free. I coordinated with 23 vendors because you were too busy or overwhelmed to handle it yourself. Sarah interrupts with a bitter laugh. Nobody forced you to do all that, Linda. You just took over because you always need to be the center of attention. You criticized the venue coordinator when she suggested different linens. You changed the flower arrangements without asking me first. You acted like the mother of the bride at every vendor meeting. The accusations sting because they contain tiny grains of truth twisted into weapons. I did speak up when the venue coordinator suggested cheaper options that would look shabby. I did adjust the flower arrangements when I realized Sarah's original choices wouldn't photograph well. I did take charge during vendor meetings because Sarah seemed paralyzed by decisions and Helen had no experience planning formal events. Our mother, Helen, joins the call without warning, her voice sharp with irritation. "Linda, you've made everyone uncomfortable for months. Mrs. Patterson at church mentioned how pushy you seemed during the rehearsal space booking. The caterer asked if you were a professional wedding planner because you kept calling with detailed changes." I realize my family has reframed every act of care as an act of aggression. My attention to detail became control. My financial generosity became showing off. My organizational skills became pushiness. When I mention the $15,000 I've spent, Helen's response chills me to the bone. "That was your choice, Linda. Don't expect gratitude for showing off your success to everyone." The conversation spirals as accusations fly. Sarah claims I made her feel like a guest at her own wedding. Helen insists I embarrassed the family by being too involved in vendor communications. They paint my efforts as selfish attention-seeking rather than loving support. During the heated exchange, I hear muffled voices in the background. Someone asks Sarah a question, but she doesn't mute the call properly. "Did you tell her about the photographer thing?" a male voice inquires. Sarah quickly hangs up without explanation. The photographer thing. My stomach lurches with new dread. I immediately call Jessica, the wedding photographer, despite the late hour. Jessica answers on the third ring, sounding tired but alert. "Linda, thank goodness you called. I've been confused about some communications I received yesterday." She explains that Sarah and Helen contacted her Thursday afternoon, claiming I was no longer involved in wedding coordination. They asked Jessica to remove me from all email correspondence and to send photos exclusively to Sarah after the wedding. They provided new contact information and requested that all future communication go through Helen instead of me. "I was surprised because you've been my primary contact for 6 months, Jessica continues. "You knew exactly what shots Sarah wanted, the timeline we'd discussed, the family groupings we'd planned. Sarah seemed unfamiliar with details we'd spent hours discussing. The betrayal runs deeper than I imagined. While pretending to plan my exclusion as a spontaneous decision, my family had been systematically erasing me from vendor relationships for days. They were stealing my work while keeping my money, planning to take full credit for the wedding I'd organized from start to finish." I thank Jessica and hang up, my mind racing. If they contacted the photographer, what other vendors received similar instructions? I call Maria, the florist, who answers groggily. "Linda, is everything okay? It's nearly 1 a.m. I apologize for the late hour, but explain I need to know about recent communications with my family. Maria's voice becomes cautious as she describes Helen's visit on Tuesday. "Your mother brought paperwork removing your name as the primary contact," Maria explains. "She said there had been family disagreements and you were no longer involved in planning. I found it strange since you'd been so detail-oriented about every arrangement." Helen had presented new contracts with Sarah's name, replacing mine, along with emergency contact information that excluded me entirely. They'd even changed the delivery instructions, requesting that flowers be delivered directly to Sarah's apartment instead of the venue where I'd planned to oversee setup. The venue coordinator, Tom, confirms my worst fears when I call him next. Sarah and David visited Wednesday afternoon, requesting to update all billing and contact information because Linda's role had changed within the family dynamic. They provided new emergency contacts, removed me from vendor communication lists, and requested that all day of wedding coordination go through Helen instead of me. They claimed I'd become too stressed and the family was taking over to protect my well-being. I hang up, feeling nauseated by the scope of their deception. This wasn't an impulsive exclusion born from wedding day nerves or family tension. This was a calculated plan executed over several days to completely erase me from the wedding while keeping every benefit I'd provided. My cousin Jennifer calls at 1:30 a.m., her voice heavy with guilt. "Linda, I'm so sorry about accidentally adding you to that chat. I didn't realize what they were planning. She reveals details that shatter my remaining illusions about family loyalty. Last month's barbecue at Uncle Robert's house included a private conversation between Helen, Sarah, Mark, and several aunts about what to do about Linda. They were worried you'd expect too much credit during the wedding reception, Jennifer explains reluctantly. Sarah was concerned that David's family would think you were showing off financially or trying to upstage the bride. The family decided to minimize my role, publicly telling people that everyone contributed to make Sarah's day special, rather than acknowledging my massive financial and creative investment. They rationalized this as protecting family dignity and preventing me from feeling too important. But the most devastating revelation comes next. Jennifer's voice drops to a whisper as she shares the detail that breaks my heart completely. Sarah and David have been telling his family that the wedding expenses were covered by family savings and that you were merely helping with some design work. David's parents complimented your mom on her wise financial planning for the wedding last week. I close my eyes, understanding the full scope of their betrayal. Not only did they plan to exclude me from the wedding I funded and organized, but they actively lied to David's family to steal credit for my generosity. David's parents believe Helen and Sarah are financially responsible people who carefully saved for this expensive wedding, while I'm portrayed as a helpful relative who contributed some graphic design skills. The lies extend to social media, where Sarah has posted repeatedly about how blessed we are that our families came together to make this day possible. No mention of my specific contributions, no acknowledgement of the financial reality, just vague gratitude for generic family support. I've been erased from the narrative entirely, while my money and work remain fully present in every detail of tomorrow's celebration. My family created a fiction where they're generous, financially stable people who planned a beautiful wedding through teamwork and careful saving. The truth that one daughter sacrificed everything to give the other daughter a dream wedding has been buried under layers of lies and manipulation. As I finally try to sleep at 3 a.m., I realize my family didn't just exclude me from Sarah's wedding. They stole my identity, my contributions, and my reputation to protect their own pride and dignity. Tomorrow, while I sit alone in my apartment, Sarah will be celebrated as a bride whose family came together to create magic. David's parents will praise Helen's organization and financial wisdom. Wedding guests will admire the beautiful details without knowing who actually planned and paid for every element. My generosity has been transformed into their accomplishment, my sacrifice into their success story. I don't sleep. By 8 a.m., I'm calling vendors needing to understand the complete scope of my family's deception. My first call goes to Maria the florist, who sounds more awake and sympathetic in daylight. Linda, I have to tell you something that bothered me about your mother's visit Tuesday. Maria begins. She brought paperwork that looked hastily prepared, removing your name as the primary contact. When I asked about you specifically, she said there had been family disagreements and you were no longer involved in planning. The detail that disturbs Maria most is Helen's insistence that all communication about the wedding should exclude me completely. She seemed almost aggressive about making sure you wouldn't be contacted about anything Maria explains. I've never had a family member work so hard to cut someone out of wedding communications. Maria reveals that Helen requested the invoice be readdressed to Sarah, despite my credit card being on file for the $1,800 payment that cleared 2 months ago. When Maria explained the payment had already been processed through my account, Helen became agitated and demanded to know if there was any way to change the billing records. Tom, the venue coordinator, provides more disturbing details when I call Riverside Gardens. His voice is professional but concerned as he describes Wednesday's visit from Sarah and David. They wanted to update all contact information because, in David's words, Linda's role had changed within the family dynamic. Tom explains. Sarah seemed unfamiliar with basic logistics we'd discussed extensively, like the ceremony timeline and reception room setup. When Tom asked about the detailed floor plans I'd created showing table arrangements and dance floor positioning, Sarah had no idea what he meant. She'd never seen the documents I spent weeks perfecting, despite them being central to the venue's preparation for tomorrow's reception. David explained that the family was taking over coordination to protect my well-being because I'd become too stressed by the planning process. They requested that all day of wedding communication go through Helen, who had no background knowledge about any arrangements. The most chilling detail comes when Tom mentions the contract change attempt. Sarah and David asked to modify the primary contact responsible for damages, timeline coordination, and emergency decisions during the event. Tom explains that venue policy requires the person whose credit card holds the security deposit to remain the primary contact unless they provide written authorization for transfer. When Tom requested my written consent for the change, Sarah became flustered and said they'd handle it later. They left without completing the paperwork, meaning I remain legally responsible for tomorrow's event, despite being excluded from attendance. My call to Jessica, the photographer, reveals even more calculation behind their actions. Jessica's voice carries genuine confusion as she describes Thursday's conversation with Helen and Sarah. Your mother seemed to know very little about the photography timeline we'd spent months developing, Jessica explains. When I asked about the family photo groupings you and I had planned, she had no information. Sarah couldn't answer questions about the specific shots you'd requested. Helen had insisted that all photos be delivered exclusively to Sarah, with instructions that I should receive no copies of any images from the wedding I'd funded. They requested that Jessica sign a modified contract removing my name from any photography agreements, despite my being the client who booked and paid for her services 6 months ago. The most disturbing revelation comes when Jessica mentions their attitude during the meeting. They seemed almost hostile when I mentioned your involvement, she confides. Sarah actually rolled her eyes when I described how detail-oriented and helpful you'd been throughout our planning process. I call the caterer next, discovering that Helen attempted to modify our agreement Friday afternoon. The catering company Elegant Events had received a visit from Helen, claiming that she needed to update the contact information for tomorrow's reception. Helen tried to change the emergency contact from you to herself, explains Rebecca, the catering coordinator. When I mentioned that you'd been wonderful to work with and had such clear vision for the menu, Helen's expression became very cold. She said you were no longer involved and that the family preferred to handle things differently. Rebecca found the interaction strange because Helen seemed unfamiliar with the menu details we'd finalized months ago. She couldn't answer questions about dietary restrictions for specific guests, the timeline for cocktail hour, or the preferred setup for the buffet stations. When Rebecca mentioned that final payment was due upon delivery payable to my credit card, as per our contract, Helen became agitated. She insisted that payment arrangements should be changed to reflect new family circumstances, but couldn't provide alternative payment information. The pattern becomes clear through a dozen similar calls. My family spent several days systematically contacting vendors, attempting to erase me from all wedding-related communications while keeping the financial benefits of my contributions. They tried to steal credit for my work while avoiding responsibility for payment or coordination. The most heartbreaking call comes when I contact David directly, something I've avoided throughout the planning process, to respect Sarah's role as the bride. David answers cheerfully, clearly excited about tomorrow. Linda, Sarah's told me so much about how helpful you've been with design work. We really appreciate your creative contributions to our special day." His words hit like physical blows. Design work, creative contributions. Sarah has convinced her fiancé that I'm merely a helpful relative who provided some graphic design services, not the person who planned and funded their entire wedding. David continues enthusiastically about how impressed his family is with the Thompson family's financial responsibility and planning skills. They've commented repeatedly on your mother's wisdom in saving for such a beautiful celebration. I realize that David has no idea about the true financial reality of his wedding. He believes his future in-laws are financially stable people who carefully saved for this expensive celebration. He has no knowledge of my $15,000 sacrifice, my months of vendor coordination, or my central role in creating every element of tomorrow's event. When I gently ask what Sarah has told him about my involvement, David's response destroys any remaining hope for family reconciliation. "Sarah mentioned that you offered to help with some design elements since you're good with computers. She said the whole family pooled resources to make tomorrow special. Your mom has been amazing at coordinating everything." The lies run so deep that Sarah's fiancé has been completely deceived about the reality of his wedding planning and funding. He's marrying into what he believes is a financially responsible, well-organized family, when the truth is that one daughter sacrificed everything to create an illusion for the other daughter's benefit. As I hang up with David, I understand that my family's betrayal extends far beyond excluding me from tomorrow's celebration. They've constructed an elaborate fiction that steals my identity contributions and sacrifices to enhance their own reputation and dignity. Tomorrow, David will marry Sarah, believing he's joining a family that came together to create something beautiful through teamwork and financial wisdom. The reality that his wedding exists only because of one person's massive sacrifice has been buried under layers of lies and manipulation. I sit at my kitchen table staring at bank statements showing $15,432 in wedding-related expenses. Every vendor contract bears my name, my credit card information, my contact details. The entire celebration tomorrow exists because of my generosity, yet I've been systematically erased from every narrative surrounding the event. My family didn't just exclude me from Sarah's wedding. They committed identity theft, stealing my contributions and rewriting history to protect their pride and dignity. The depth of their deception and the calculated nature of their betrayal destroys any possibility of forgiveness or reconciliation. They were ashamed of needing my help, embarrassed by their financial limitations, and chose to protect their image by destroying my generosity and erasing my sacrifice from their story. Saturday morning arrives with the weight of inevitability. By 9 a.m., I'm driving to my mother's house in Beaverton, knowing this confrontation will determine whether my family deserves any more of my time or energy. I park outside the small ranch house, where I grew up, its beige siding and overgrown garden, looking tired in the morning light. Through the front window, I can see activity inside. Hair curlers, makeup bags, and wedding accessories scattered across the dining table. Sarah's bridesmaid friends have arrived early to transform the house into a pre-wedding preparation space. I knock once and walk inside, using my key from childhood. The atmosphere freezes instantly when I appear in the living room. Helen sits in a chair by the window, large pink curlers covering her head, while Sarah perches at a makeshift vanity station near the fireplace. Her friend Angela is applying foundation to Sarah's face, but stops mid-motion when she sees me. "You need to leave," Sarah says without looking up, her voice flat and emotionless. I place a folder of printed bank statements and vendor receipts on the coffee table, the documents spreading across its surface like evidence in a court case. $15,432. Every vendor contract has my name, my credit card, my contact information. Helen stands abruptly, curlers bouncing as she moves. You offered to help Linda. No one forced you to spend that money. Help my voice rises despite my intention to stay calm. I planned, designed, coordinated, and funded this entire wedding. You've been telling people it was family savings while systematically cutting me out of any recognition for my work. The room's tension escalates when I reveal my knowledge of their vendor manipulation. The contract changes and the false narratives told to David's family. Sarah finally looks directly at me, her partially applied makeup making her appear younger and more vulnerable. You always make everything about you, Linda. It's my wedding day. Can't you just let me have this one thing without taking over? That you couldn't afford? I snap back immediately, regretting the harshness of my words, but unable to stop them from emerging. The confrontation explodes when Mark arrives early for pre-wedding photos, still wearing his construction work clothes and looking exhausted from his night shift. His presence shifts the dynamic because Mark has always been more direct and honest than our mother or sister. Linda, what are you doing here? Mark asks, but his tone lacks the hostility I expected. I'm trying to understand how my family could exclude me from an event I spent 8 months planning and $15,000 funding. I explain, my voice steadier now. Mark sits heavily on the couch, running his hands through his short brown hair. What he reveals next breaks my heart more completely than any previous betrayal. Linda, I need to tell you something. We've been planning this for weeks, not because you were controlling, but because we were embarrassed. The admission hangs in the air like a toxic cloud. Mark explains that Helen worried David's wealthy family would judge the Thompson family for needing my financial assistance. Sarah feared his parents would think she came from a background where families couldn't afford their own celebrations. So you decided to cut me out and steal credit for my work? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark's explanation reveals the full scope of their rationalization. They convinced themselves they were protecting family dignity by minimizing my role. They assumed I enjoyed helping and wouldn't mind being erased from the narrative if it meant protecting the family's reputation with David's parents. We told ourselves you'd understand. Mark admits, his voice heavy with shame. We thought you'd rather have Sarah be happy than get credit for helping. I stare at my brother, realizing my family didn't just betray me for money or attention. They were ashamed of needing my help and chose to protect their pride by destroying my generosity. The depth of their selfishness and the calculated nature of their deception eliminates any hope for forgiveness. Helen interjects with defensive anger, claiming they had to protect the family's image because I was making everyone look bad by being so visibly generous. She insists that David's family was starting to ask uncomfortable questions about our financial dynamics. Your spending made it obvious we couldn't afford Sarah's wedding, Helen explains with bitter resentment. David's mother kept complimenting you on your generosity, which made the rest of us look poor and inadequate. The twisted logic astounds me. My generosity became their humiliation. My love became their embarrassment. My sacrifice became their shame. Sarah speaks for the first time in minutes, her voice small and defensive. David's family has money, Linda. Real money. They were going to judge us if they knew we couldn't even pay for our own daughter's wedding. I realize my family's betrayal stems from deep insecurity and pride rather than malice or greed. They couldn't bear the shame of appearing financially dependent, so they chose to steal credit for my work rather than acknowledge their limitations honestly. The conversation reaches its breaking point when Angela, Sarah's friend, who has been quietly listening, speaks up with obvious discomfort. Maybe I should leave you guys to work this out privately. No, I tell her firmly. Stay. I want witnesses to this conversation. I turn back to my family, my voice steady and cold. You're not just ashamed of needing help. You're ashamed of me for being able to provide it. My success makes you feel inadequate, so you decided to destroy my contributions rather than celebrate them. Helen's face flushes red above her pink curlers. You act like you're better than us, Linda. Always flashing your money around, taking over everything, making decisions for people who didn't ask for your input. The accusations reveal the resentment that's been festering beneath their gratitude. My ability to fund Sarah's wedding triggered their insecurities about their own financial limitations. Instead of appreciating my generosity, they interpreted it as a judgment of their inadequacy. Mark tries to mediate, suggesting we can work things out after the wedding, but I cut him off sharply. There is no after the wedding for us, Mark. You chose to humiliate me publicly to protect your pride privately. That choice has consequences. Sarah begins crying, her makeup smearing as tears fall. I just wanted one perfect day, Linda. I didn't want David's family to think I was marrying down, or that my family was charity cases. The irony is devastating. In trying to protect her dignity, Sarah has destroyed our relationship and exposed the very insecurities she hoped to hide. David's family will eventually learn the truth about wedding funding, making the lies even more damaging than honest acknowledgement would have been. As I prepare to leave, Angela, who has remained silent throughout the confrontation, speaks with quiet courage. Sarah, I think you're making a huge mistake. Linda did something incredible for you, and you're throwing it away because of pride. That's not the kind of person I thought you were. Sarah's tears intensify, but she doesn't respond to her friend's observation. Helen stands protectively near her daughter, glaring at both Angela and me. I gather my documentation from the coffee table, my voice calm, despite the emotional devastation coursing through me. You have 4 hours to figure out how to coordinate 23 vendors, execute detailed timelines, and handle emergency situations during your reception. Since I'm apparently not wanted and my contributions aren't appreciated, you're welcome to handle everything yourselves. Mark attempts one final appeal as I reach the door. Linda, please don't ruin Sarah's wedding day because you're angry with us. I turn back my response, cutting through his plea with surgical precision. I'm not ruining anything, Mark. I'm simply removing myself from arrangements I'm no longer welcome to attend. If that ruins Sarah's day, perhaps you should have considered that before excluding the person who made it possible. The last thing I see before closing the door is Sarah's tear-streaked face staring at me with a mixture of regret and defiance, while Helen's expression remains hardened with stubborn pride. As I drive home, I understand that my family's betrayal represents something deeper than wedding drama or financial disagreement. They chose their image over their integrity, their pride over their principles, and their shame over my love. The bridge between us hasn't just burned. It's been deliberately destroyed by people who valued their reputation more than their relationships. I return home with crystalline clarity about what needs to happen next. The wedding is scheduled to begin at 4 p.m., giving me 7 hours to execute a plan that will teach my family about consequences and responsibility. I open my laptop and locate the folder labeled Sarah's Wedding. 39 files represent 8 months of meticulous planning, vendor contracts, payment, confirmations, design, mock-ups, timeline, spreadsheets, guest lists with dietary restrictions, seating charts, music playlists, decoration layouts, lighting plans, emergency contact lists, and hundreds of email exchanges coordinating every detail. My first call goes to the venue coordinator, Tom, at Riverside Gardens. His voice is professional, but concerned when I explain the situation honestly. Tom, this is Linda Martinez. I need to clarify my status regarding today's Thompson-Williams wedding. The family has excluded me from attendance while maintaining all benefits of my financial contributions and planning work. I need to understand my legal obligations. Tom's response confirms what I suspected. As the primary contact whose credit card holds the security deposit, I remain legally responsible for damages, timeline coordination, and emergency decisions during the event. The venue cannot legally transfer this responsibility without my written consent, which Sarah and David failed to obtain during their Wednesday visit. Without you present as the primary contact, the venue cannot guarantee smooth coordination, Tom explains. Multiple vendors have your contact information for emergency situations. If problems arise during the ceremony or reception, they'll call you, not the bride. The irony is perfect. My family's plan to steal credit for my work contains a fatal flaw. They cannot escape the legal and logistical responsibilities that come with wedding coordination. I begin systematically calling vendors, explaining my situation with calm professionalism. The florist, Maria, responds with immediate sympathy and growing concern. Linda, I'm supposed to deliver arrangements in 2 hours, but I need to coordinate setup timing with you. If you're not there, how should I handle delivery logistics? Instead of providing solutions, I respond with careful honesty. Maria, since the family has informed me I'm not wanted at this event, I cannot participate in coordination. You'll need to contact Sarah directly for all logistics. The caterer, Rebecca, expresses panic when I explain that I cannot oversee reception coordination as originally planned. The catering timeline requires precise coordination with music, photography, and decoration teams, all information contained in files only I possess. Without your coordination sheets, we'll be setting up blindly, Rebecca explains with growing alarm. The bride and her mother seemed unfamiliar with the specific timing requirements when we spoke yesterday. My response remains consistent across every vendor call. I am no longer involved in this event due to family circumstances. Please direct all questions to the bride, Sarah Thompson, or her mother, Helen Thompson. One by one, I begin deleting the 39 files that represent months of work. Contract copies, vendor contact lists, timeline schedules, emergency procedures, setup instructions. Everything disappears from my computer with deliberate finality. The deletion process feels therapeutic rather than destructive. Each file that vanishes represents a piece of my energy and creativity I'm reclaiming from people who don't value my contributions. When the photographer Jessica calls about family photo timing, I explain calmly that I am no longer involved in the wedding coordination and cannot provide the detailed schedule we developed together. She'll need to work directly with Sarah to recreate arrangements we spent weeks perfecting. The DJ contacts me about music transition timing between ceremony and reception, another detail that requires coordination with multiple vendors. I direct him to Sarah, knowing she has no knowledge of the complex schedule I created to ensure seamless transitions throughout the day. By 2 p.m., my phone rings constantly as vendors encounter coordination problems that only I can solve. Instead of helping, I let each call go to voicemail, then delete the messages without listening. I draft a group text to Sarah, Helen, and Mark. Since I am not invited and apparently not wanted, I am removing myself from all wedding responsibilities effective immediately. You will need to handle vendor coordination yourselves. I am deleting all wedding files to avoid confusion about who is in charge. The response is immediate and explosive. Helen calls within minutes, her voice shrill with panic and rage. Linda, you cannot do this. It's Sarah's wedding day. How can you be so cruel? My response is measured and calm. Helen, you told me not to come because Sarah doesn't want me there. I'm respecting her wishes by removing myself completely from her wedding. Helen's tone shifts between pleading and threatening. The caterer just called, saying they can't set up properly without your timeline. The florist doesn't know where to place centerpieces. The DJ has no idea about music transitions. Those are Sarah's responsibilities. Now I respond evenly. She wanted control of her wedding day. Now she has it completely. The irony becomes apparent as Helen describes the growing chaos. Vendors are calling Sarah and Helen with questions about details that only I know. The timeline I spent weeks perfecting exists nowhere except in the files I've deleted. The coordination spreadsheets that ensure smooth transitions between ceremony and reception have disappeared. Sarah gets on the phone, her voice breaking with tears and desperation. "Linda, please don't ruin my wedding day. I'm sorry we hurt you, but I need your help right now." Her plea might have moved me yesterday, but today I hear only the self-centered panic of someone facing consequences for cruel choices. "Sarah, you told me this morning that you wanted your wedding day without me taking over. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for." When Sarah mentions that vendors are threatening to leave without proper coordination, I remind her that she and Helen spent days convincing these same vendors that I was no longer necessary for successful wedding coordination. "You told them the family was taking over and that my involvement was no longer needed," I point out. "Today is your opportunity to prove that was true." The phone call ends with Sarah sobbing and Helen cursing, but I feel no satisfaction from their distress. This isn't revenge. This is education about responsibility and consequences. David calls at 3 p.m., his voice confused and increasingly panicked. "Linda, I don't understand what's happening, but our wedding is falling apart. The venue coordinator says vendors can't execute their services without the planning documents you created." I explain the full situation to David calmly and honestly. His shock and horror grow as he learns about his family's lies, the stolen credit for wedding funding, and the systematic exclusion plan that led to today's crisis. "I had no idea," David repeats multiple times. "Sarah told me your family pooled resources and that you helped with design work. I thought your mother was the primary coordinator." David's genuine ignorance about his own wedding's reality adds another layer to my family's deception. He's been completely manipulated, led to believe he was marrying into a financially stable family with strong organizational skills. When David begs me to help save his wedding day, I respond with compassion but firmness. "David, I spent $15,000 in 8 months creating your perfect wedding. Your fiancée and her family excluded me from attending while keeping all benefits of my work. I cannot participate in celebrating people who treat generosity with such cruelty." The conversation ends with David understanding the full scope of his fiancée's family's betrayal and deception. As 3:30 approaches, my phone rings continuously with vendors reporting coordination failures, family members demanding I fix problems, and wedding guests asking about ceremony delays. I turn off my phone, pour a glass of wine, and sit on my balcony overlooking the city. Somewhere across Portland, my sister is learning what it means to plan a wedding without someone else's money skills and dedication. The lesson she's receiving today is worth far more than the $15,000 I spent funding her celebration. At 3:45 p.m., exactly 15 minutes before the ceremony is scheduled to begin, the chaos reaches its peak. I turn my phone back on to discover 27 missed calls and 43 unread text messages from family members, vendors, and wedding guests. The florist Maria has called 6 times, her messages growing increasingly desperate. The final voicemail explains that she delivered arrangements to Riverside Gardens, but has no idea about placement location, setup timing, or decoration coordination. The centerpieces are sitting in boxes while the ceremony space remains undecorated. Rebecca from the catering company has left 4 frantic messages. The kitchen staff arrived on schedule but cannot begin food preparation without knowing the final guest count timing for cocktail service or coordination with other vendors. The elaborate menu I spent months perfecting cannot be executed without the detailed service timeline I created and deleted. The DJ Marcus has called repeatedly explaining that his equipment is set up, but he has no information about music transition timing, special requests, or coordination with the photographer for key moments. The carefully crafted playlist I assembled to match ceremony and reception moods sits unused because no one can tell him when to play specific songs. Tom. The venue coordinator sounds increasingly stressed in his messages. Multiple vendors are requesting information that apparently only I possess. The ceremony cannot begin without coordination between music photography and officiant timing. The reception room remains unset because no one knows the table arrangement plan or lighting design I spent weeks perfecting. Most telling are the messages from David, whose voice transforms from confusion to devastation as he understands the full scope of his wedding's collapse. Linda. I'm calling from the venue. Half our vendors are threatening to leave because no one can answer their questions. Sarah is having a breakdown in the bridal suite. Her mother is screaming at vendors. I had no idea about any of the lies or the money situation. Please call me back. His final message left 10 minutes ago carries complete defeat. The ceremony has been postponed indefinitely. David's family is asking serious questions about Sarah's family's honesty and financial situation. I think I need to reconsider whether I can marry into a family that lies and treats people so cruelly. This isn't the family character I expected. I pour another glass of wine and check social media where the wedding disaster is already becoming visible. Wedding guests are posting confused updates about delayed timing and coordination problems. Several of David's family members have shared concerned messages about the organizational chaos and unprofessional vendor coordination. My phone rings with a call from my cousin Jennifer, her voice carrying a mixture of guilt and amazement. Linda, what did you do? Sarah called me crying, saying the entire wedding has fallen apart and vendors are leaving. I explained my decision, calmly emphasizing that I simply removed myself from responsibilities for an event I was excluded from attending. Jennifer's response reveals that word is spreading quickly through our extended family about the real story behind today's disaster. Everyone is finding out about the money and the planning you did, Jennifer confides. Sarah's friends are asking questions about who actually organized everything. Angela posted on Instagram about how wrong it was to exclude someone who gave so much to make the wedding happen. The truth is emerging organically as vendors, guests, and wedding party members piece together the reality of my central role in creating the celebration that cannot proceed without my coordination. Helen calls at 4:30, her voice raw from crying and shouting. Linda, you have destroyed your sister's wedding day. How will you live with yourself? My response is steady and clear. Helen, I respected Sarah's stated desire not to have me at her wedding. You cannot exclude someone from an event while simultaneously demanding they coordinate it. Helen's panic intensifies as she describes the complete breakdown of vendor coordination. The caterer has packed up and left after waiting an hour for menu confirmation and service timing. The florist removed the arrangements when no one could provide setup instructions. The DJ is charging for a full day despite being unable to provide contracted services due to lack of coordination. You're the only one who knows how to make this work, Helen pleads. Please come save Sarah's day, and we'll figure out the family stuff later. The desperate appeal might have succeeded yesterday, but today I understand my worth too clearly to accept such manipulation. Helen, you spent weeks planning to exclude me while keeping my money and stealing credit for my work. Today you're learning what happens when you destroy relationships with people who love you. David calls again at 5 p.m. with the most significant update yet. His voice carries new firmness and clarity as he explains his decision. Linda, I've called off the wedding completely. Not just postponed, rescheduled indefinitely, while I reconsider whether I can marry into a family that lies about finances and treats generosity with such cruelty. He describes his family's shocked reaction to learning the truth about wedding funding and coordination. His parents had praised Helen's financial responsibility and organizational skills for weeks, only to discover that a daughter they'd barely met had sacrificed everything to create the celebration they were admitting. My mother is appalled by the deception, David explains. She specifically asked Helen about the family's ability to afford such an expensive wedding, and Helen lied directly to her face. My parents feel manipulated and deceived. David's father, a successful attorney, is particularly disturbed by the systematic lies and credit theft that preceded today's exclusion. The character issues revealed by my family's behavior raise serious concerns about long-term compatibility and trustworthiness. I cannot start a marriage based on lies and cruelty, David continues. Sarah's willingness to exclude you after taking your money and work shows a side of her character I never saw before. The conversation ends with David thanking me for opening his eyes to his fiancée's family dynamics before making a lifetime commitment to people who value pride over principles and image over integrity. My phone buzzes with a text from Sarah. I know you hate me now, but could we please talk? Everything has fallen apart and I don't know what to do. I consider responding, but realize that any conversation would only provide an opportunity for manipulation and false promises. Sarah's family had weeks to reconsider their cruel plan, multiple chances to acknowledge my contributions honestly, and countless opportunities to treat my generosity with respect. They chose deception exclusion and credit theft instead. The natural consequences of those choices are unfolding exactly as they should. As evening approaches, I ordered dinner from my favorite Thai restaurant and settle in for a quiet night at home. Somewhere across the city, my family is learning that relationships have consequences, that generosity deserves respect, and that pride can be more expensive than they ever imagined. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate love and family unity has instead exposed the ugly truth about people who value appearances more than authenticity, image more than integrity, and pride more than principles. Sarah wanted a wedding day without me in it. She got exactly what she asked for. The aftermath unfolds over the following weeks, like a masterclass in natural consequences and personal growth. 3 days after the collapsed wedding, I receive an unexpected call from David's mother, Margaret Williams, whose voice carries both warmth and determination. Linda, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. David shared your contact information because our family wants to address this situation properly. Margaret explains that the Williams family is appalled by the deception and treatment I received. As successful attorneys, both she and her husband recognize the financial fraud and character issues revealed by my family's behavior. We had no idea about the true financial arrangements or your central role in planning the celebration, Margaret continues. Helen repeatedly assured us that the wedding expenses were covered by careful family saving and shared contributions. To learn that one person sacrificed $15,000 and 8 months of work while being systematically excluded is unconscionable. She reveals that David has decided to end his engagement to Sarah permanently, not just postpone the wedding. The lies about wedding funding, the credit theft, and the cruel exclusion revealed character traits that make Sarah unsuitable as a life partner. Our son cannot build a future with someone who treats family members so cruelly, especially someone who sacrificed so much for her benefit, Margaret explains with quiet conviction. The conversation shifts when Margaret makes an unexpected proposal. The Williams family wants to hire me professionally to plan their other son's wedding next spring. They were impressed by the vendor relationships I'd built, the attention to detail evident in my planning documents, and my professional handling of an impossible situation. You demonstrated grace under pressure and maintained your integrity while being treated abominably, Margaret notes. Those are exactly the qualities we want in someone coordinating our family celebrations. Within a week, I received contracts to plan the Williams wedding with a $5,000 planning fee plus expenses. The irony is perfect. My family's betrayal has launched my professional wedding planning career with a prestigious client who appreciates my skills and character. 10 days after the collapsed wedding, Sarah appears at my apartment, unannounced, looking exhausted and defeated. Her hair hangs limp around her shoulders, and her eyes show the aftermath of extensive crying. "Linda, please let me apologize properly. I know I ruined everything between us, but I need you to understand what happened." I invite her inside, but remain standing my posture, communicating that this conversation has strict boundaries. Sarah sits on my couch, her hands twisting nervously in her lap as she begins a halting explanation. She admits that the exclusion plan originated from her own insecurity about David's family wealth and status. Helen encouraged these fears by suggesting that my visible generosity made the Thompson family appear inadequate and financially dependent. "We convinced ourselves that minimizing your role was protecting family dignity," Sarah explains with obvious shame. "But really, we were just embarrassed that I couldn't afford my own wedding." Her confession reveals deeper truths about family dynamics and the destructive power of pride. Sarah acknowledges that watching my professional success and financial stability triggered resentment she'd harbored for years. My ability to fund her dream wedding highlighted her own limitations and dependencies. "I was jealous of your independence and success," Sarah admits quietly. "It felt like you were showing off how much better you were doing than the rest of us." The honest admission opens a door to genuine conversation about family relationships, financial insecurity, and the difference between generosity and superiority. Sarah recognizes that my offers to help came from love, not judgment, and that her interpretation of my actions revealed her own insecurities rather than my motivations. She also reveals that Helen has been struggling with depression since the wedding disaster, understanding that her pride and manipulation destroyed relationships with both daughters. Mark has been attending therapy to address his passive role in the family's cruel decision-making. The conversation reaches its emotional peak when Sarah asks directly for forgiveness and the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. "I don't expect you to trust me again quickly, but I hope someday we can be sisters again. I learned something about myself that I don't like, and I want to become a better person." My response carries careful consideration and conditional hope. "Sarah, forgiveness is possible, but it requires more than apologies. You need to demonstrate through actions that you've learned why your choices were so destructive. That means therapy, honest self-reflection, and commitment to treating people's generosity with respect rather than resentment. I establish clear boundaries for any potential relationship rebuilding. Sarah must complete family therapy with Helen and Mark to address the toxic dynamics that led to my exclusion. She needs individual counseling to examine her financial insecurities and learn healthier ways to handle feelings of inadequacy. Most importantly, she must make public acknowledgments correcting the false narratives about wedding funding and planning that she spread through social media and community conversations. Sarah agrees to all conditions without argument, recognizing that rebuilding trust requires sustained effort rather than quick fixes. 2 months later, my wedding planning business, Martinez Celebrations, has 3 clients and a growing reputation for detailed coordination and professional integrity. The vendor relationships I developed planning Sarah's wedding have become the foundation for a thriving career that brings me both financial success and creative fulfillment. Helen contacts me through Mark requesting family therapy sessions to address the underlying issues that led to such destructive decision-making. Our first session, mediated by Dr. Patricia Hansen, reveals generational patterns of financial shame and pride that have damaged multiple relationships within our family. Helen admits that her own childhood poverty created defensive reactions to financial dependence that she projected onto Sarah's situation. Watching me easily afford expensive wedding elements triggered memories of her own limitations and resulted in resentment toward my success rather than gratitude for my generosity. The therapy sessions continue monthly, slowly rebuilding communication and understanding among family members who finally recognize that love requires respect, generosity deserves acknowledgement, and pride cannot be more important than principles. Sarah begins individual therapy and makes public corrections to her social media posts, acknowledging my central role in wedding planning and funding. She writes a detailed letter to David's family, apologizing for the deception and taking full responsibility for the lies that destroyed their son's trust. Mark starts assertiveness training to learn how to speak up when family dynamics become unhealthy rather than passively supporting harmful decisions to avoid conflict. 6 months after the wedding disaster, I attend Sunday dinner at Helen's house for the first time since the confrontation. The atmosphere feels tentative but hopeful as family members practice new communication patterns learned through therapy. The biggest change is how my success and independence are discussed. Instead of triggering resentment and defensive pride, my achievements are celebrated as family accomplishments that reflect positively on everyone's support and love. Sarah has started a savings account for her future wedding, whenever that might happen, determined to fund her own celebration rather than depend on others' generosity. She works additional hours at the boutique and has taken financial planning classes to develop healthier money management skills. Helen has returned to school pursuing a certification in event coordination, inspired by watching my business grow and recognizing her own organizational talents that were previously channeled into manipulation rather than professional development. Mark has been promoted to supervisor at his construction job and is saving money to buy a house, having learned from our family's crisis that financial independence prevents the pride issues that damaged our relationships. The most meaningful moment comes when Sarah presents me with a handwritten letter, thanking me for forcing the family to confront its destructive patterns through my refusal to enable their cruel behavior. "You saved us from becoming people we couldn't respect," Sarah writes. "The pain of losing David and facing our character flaws was necessary for us to grow into better human beings." A year later, Martinez Celebrations has expanded to include corporate events and holiday parties, employing 2 part-time coordinators and maintaining vendor relationships throughout the Portland metropolitan area. The business that began from my family's betrayal has become a source of professional fulfillment and financial independence that exceeds my previous freelance graphic design income. David contacts me occasionally, sharing updates about his new relationship with someone whose family values honesty and treats generosity with appreciation rather than resentment. He thanks me repeatedly for revealing character issues that would have made their marriage impossible to sustain. My family relationships have been rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect, honest communication, and clear boundaries that protect everyone's dignity while preventing the toxic dynamics that nearly destroyed us. The most important lesson I learned is that love without respect is manipulation. Generosity without acknowledgement is exploitation. And family loyalty cannot require accepting cruelty or dishonesty. Sometimes the people who hurt us most deeply are the ones who force us to discover our own strength, establish our boundaries, and create the life we truly deserve. That devastating text message excluding me from the wedding I funded and planned became the catalyst for professional success, personal growth, and family healing that never would have occurred if I'd continued enabling their disrespectful behavior. The pain of betrayal transformed into the power of self-advocacy, and the loss of false family harmony led to the discovery of authentic relationships built on mutual appreciation and genuine love. Today, I understand that protecting our own dignity sometimes requires letting others face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are painful to witness. The greatest gift I gave my family was refusing to rescue them from the results of their cruelty, forcing them to examine their character and choose who they wanted to become. And the greatest gift they gave me was revealing that I was strong enough to stand alone when standing together required accepting disrespect. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who took your generosity for granted? How did you handle situations where love and respect seemed to conflict? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own family struggles. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting authentic conversations about family relationships, boundaries, and self-respect. I hope my experience helps you recognize your own worth and inspires you to demand the respect you deserve from everyone in your life. Please subscribe for more stories about finding strength through difficult family situations, and share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves. Remember, protecting your own dignity is not selfish. It is essential for building relationships that truly honor love, respect, and mutual appreciation.